Removal of the gear from the 5S crankshaft. I use a strong cradle made of wood and cloth and all of it covered in oil to protect the crankshaft. The weight of the crank is actually on the snout, but it is also on wood, and that protects it from the process. Just going to use an ordinary hammer and a long punch. I use WD-40 sprayed in along the seam of the gear and the crank. The thin liquid also lets me see any movement happening with the vibration of the gear. Put a oily cloth in underneath the gear to keep it from rattling down onto the crankshaft surfaces. Put the punch on the edge of the gear and not touching the crank itself. You do not have to hit very hard. Just a solid tap and you'll hear everything ring. And move your way around the gear so that it begins to move evenly. This gear wasn't on all 5S crankshafts. It was used to drive balance shafts in the Camry engines. We won't need it anymore. We're building a 5S GTE. It's a 3S GTE head on a 5S block and crank for a 2.2 liter stroker. The gear is moving pretty well now. You want to check every once in a while to make sure it's moving evenly. You'll find sometimes the gear just doesn't seem to move with a hit, and it often means that it has already moved for that side as much as it wants to, and it actually needs to be evened out from the other side. When the cradle is standing on its end like this, it might seem wobbly, but that's just because the snout of the crank protrudes through it, and all of the weight actually comes down on that snout, transfers the energy the best, I find, and gets this gear off better. As mentioned before, there is still a piece of wood on the ground below to protect that snout. Definitely moving pretty good now. Got it. So that took me about 11 minutes. So now we're going to remove the gear, maneuvering it carefully around the crank, and then going to stuff the cloth back around it to protect the crank again. And then pull the crank out. And that's it. And the crank is ready to go to the machine shop to get turned down for 3S GTE rods and pistons.